Alright, here we go. Number 8. The Screaming Mummy. In 1886, Egyptologist Gaston Maspero oversaw the unwrapping of a mummy at the Cairo Museum and encountered something that violated every convention of Egyptian burial practice. The body had been entombed with its mouth wrenched open in a frozen, silent scream. Maspero, a man who had unwrapped dozens of royal mummies without flinching, reportedly stepped back from the table. Egyptian burial was a precise science of protection. Every step, every amulet, every inscribed prayer existed to guide the soul safely through the afterlife. The quality of your burial determined the quality of your eternity. For the royal dead, no expense was spared and no rite was omitted. This was considered as essential as breathing. This mummy had received none of it. Catalogued as Unknown Man E in the Egyptian Museum records, the body had been wrapped in sheepskin, a material considered ritually unclean in ancient Egypt. His hands and feet were bound. There were no canopic jars, no funerary texts, no protective amulets of any kind. Every omission was deliberate, every absence a condemnation. In 2011, a DNA analysis conducted as part of the Egyptian Mummy Project identified a possible royal lineage connecting Unknown Man E to the family of Ramesses III. The leading hypothesis, supported by a comparison with the judicial papyrus of Turin, dating to approximately 1150 BC, is that this may be Prince Pentewer, condemned for his alleged role in the harem conspiracy to assassinate his own father. Radiocarbon dating places the death at roughly that same period. The Egyptians believed that how you were buried determined what you became. Whoever ordered this burial was not simply executing a man. They were ensuring that whatever waited for him on the other side would be worse than anything the living world could offer. Number 7. The Bog Body's Final Hours. In May 1984, peat cutters working Lindo Moss in Cheshire, England, discovered a human leg protruding from the dark earth. What followed was one of the most disturbing forensic examinations of a ritual killing ever conducted in Britain. The body, later named Lindo Man, was so well preserved by the acidic bog that researchers could read the final hours of his life in extraordinary sepulchral detail. Dr. Don Brothwell of the British Museum led the forensic examination. Radiocarbon dating, conducted independently by the Oxford and Harwell laboratories, placed the death somewhere between 2 BC and AD 119. Lindo Man was well nourished, with carefully manicured fingernails. He was not a slave or a criminal. By every physical marker available, he was a person of some standing. He had been killed 3 times. A heavy blow had fractured his skull. A sinew cord, still in place around his neck when he was found, had been used to strangle him and snap his vertebrae. His throat had then been cut. His last meal, identified through stomach content analysis, had included burned bread and mistletoe pollen, both potentially significant in the ritual context of the period. Julius Caesar and Strabo both recorded in their own accounts that druidic practice in this region involved human sacrifice. The truly unsettling detail is not Lindo Man himself, but the pattern he represents. Over 1,000 bog bodies have been recovered across northern Europe. Tolland Man in Denmark, dated to between 400 and 200 BC, showed near identical killing methods. Grauballe Man, dated to around 310 BC, the same. Across centuries, across countries, across cultures, separated by language and geography, the same precise sequence was followed. When the same killing method appears, unchanged, across 1,000 years and thousands of miles, what belief system was so powerful, so immovable, that it demanded this level of precision from everyone who practiced it? Number 6. The Brank, the mask that silenced women. The earliest confirmed Scottish record of its use dates to 1567 in Stirling, with Perth recording its application in 1574, though the device almost certainly predates both entries. It was called the Brank, or the Scold's Bridle, and it was one of the most deliberately cruel instruments of social control ever produced by medieval authority. Physical examples survive today in collections at Walton-on-Thames, Morpeth, and Doddington Hall in Cheshire, where one retains its original locking mechanism. The brank was an iron cage that locked around the head. a spiked or bladed metal plate projected inward into the mouth, pinning the tongue against the floor of the jaw. If the wearer attempted to speak, the blades cut into the tongue. Once locked in place, the woman, and it was always a woman, was leashed to a post in the public square or led through the streets by a church official while townspeople gathered to observe. The offenses that warranted the brank were defined in Berg records as scolding, gossip, and troublemaking. No equivalent device was ever applied to men for speech-related offenses in any surviving legal record from Scotland or England. What makes the brank something more than a torture device is the language that surrounded it. Town records did not describe it as punishment, they described it as correction. The word used, consistently, was cure. This was framed not as cruelty, but as medicine. The legal and ecclesiastical authorities who commissioned and administered the brank were not operating outside their society's norms. They were enforcing them with the full blessing of civic and religious institutions under the vocabulary of care. The brank was not the act of a mob, it was the act of a system. The most unsettling thing about the brank is not what it did to the body, but what it reveals about whose voice was considered, by law and by medicine, too dangerous to allow. Number 5. The heresy of the free spirit. On the morning of June 1st, 1310, a woman named Marguerite Porete was burned at the Place de Grève in Paris. She had been given 3 opportunities to recant before the Inquisition and had refused all 3. Her crime was authorship. She had written a mystical text called The Mirror of Simple Souls, and its central argument was so threatening to the Church of Rome that it had her executed, her book condemned, and her name suppressed for centuries. The Mirror of Simple Souls proposed that a soul in perfect union with God had no further need of the Church, its sacraments, or its authority. This placed the individual conscience above institutional power, and it was precisely this conclusion that the Church found intolerable. Marguerite's theology was part of a broader current of belief spreading through Rhineland, Germany, Flanders, and northern France from around 1200 onward, a loosely connected movement that inquisitors labeled the heresy of the free spirit. In 1311, Pope Clement V issued the papal bull Ad Nostrum at the Council of Vienne, formally condemning the movement. The bull described its adherents as a detestable band of vagabonds, listing 8 specific heretical propositions. Inquisitor Johannes Nieder, writing in his For Macarius in 1437, described free spirit communities in lurid and almost certainly exaggerated terms, depicting deliberate transgression as spiritual exercise. Modern historian Robert Lerner, in his 1972 study, The Heresy of the Free Spirit, argued that much of what the Inquisition claimed about the movement was constructed by inquisitors who required a coherent enemy to prosecute. The forbidden text, at the center of it all, was not destroyed. The Mirror of Simple Souls survived, was copied in secret, and was still circulating anonymously centuries after Marguerite's death. It is still in print today. When an institution burns a woman for writing that God is closer than the Church, what does it reveal about whether that institution feared she was wrong or feared, with far greater urgency, that she was right? Number 4. The Children of Hamelin. The date is not legend. A stained glass window commissioned in the Church of Hamelin within living memory of the event recorded it as fact. On June 26, 1284, 130 children left the town of Hamelin in Lower Saxony and were never seen again. The window no longer survives, but its inscription was copied and preserved before its destruction, and the Hamelin Town Chronicle has recorded the event as historical since 1384. The earliest sources contain no rats and no piper in the folkloric sense. Those elements accumulated later, layering over a foundation that was simply this: a date, a number, and an absence. The Lüneburg manuscript, dating to around 1440 to 1450, is among the earliest textual accounts, and it records the children's disappearance with the same blunt brevity as the church inscription. Something happened in Hamelin on a summer day in 1284, and the town knew, immediately and without apparent confusion, that it was catastrophic. Historians have proposed several explanations. Professor Jürgen Udolph of the University of Leipzig has argued that the event may reflect a mass migration or organized recruitment of young people eastward into Pomerania, Moravia, or Transylvania, noting that Slavic place names in those regions contain phonetic echoes of villages near Hamelin. Other scholars have connected it to the Children's Crusade of 1212 or to a documented dancing plague of similar vintage. None of these explanations has achieved consensus, and none fully accounts for both the precision of the recorded number and the totality of the disappearance. The town of Hamelin has observed June 26 as a day of mourning for 7 centuries. One street, the Bungalowsenstrasse, the street without drums, still plays no music to this day. Whatever walked into that hillside took 130 children and left behind a wound so deep that 700 years later, a town in Lower Saxony still refuses to let music pass through one of its streets. Number 3. The Voynich Manuscript. In 1912, Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich purchased a handwritten, illuminated manuscript from the Jesuit library at Villa Mondragone in Frascati, Italy. In 2009, the University of Arizona conducted radiocarbon dating on the vellum and placed its creation between 1404 and 1438. The manuscript, now held at Yale University's Bai Neke Rare Book and Manuscript Library as MS-408, is written in an unknown script. It has never been deciphered, not by anyone, not once in over 600 years. The Voynich manuscript is not simply a coded text. Computational linguistic analysis has confirmed that its script moves left to right and exhibits statistical regularities consistent with natural language, including the kind of letter frequency patterns that distinguish meaningful writing from random symbols. Its 240 surviving pages are illustrated with images of plants that match no known botanical species, astronomical diagrams depicting structures absent from any medieval cosmological tradition, and human figures submerged in green liquid inside interlocking tubes. Whatever this book is, it was clearly meant to communicate something. The attempts to break it form a history of distinguished failure. A 1639 letter from scholar Georg Berisch to Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher, now preserved in the archives of the Pontifical Gregorian University, describes his own failed attempts to decode the text. A 1606 letter in the National Library of Sweden, attributed to Johannes Marcus Marci, suggests the manuscript was once purchased by a Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II for 600 gold ducats. Cryptographers from Bletchley Park tried. NSA analysts, in a classified effort connected to the work of William Friedman, tried. A University of Bristol computational team published a claimed partial decipherment in 2019, which was subsequently rejected on scrutiny. Nothing is held. Every claimed solution has collapsed under examination, not because the manuscript resists one particular method, but because it seems to resist all of them equally and completely. Somewhere, someone wrote 240 pages of something they considered important enough to illustrate in extraordinary detail in a hand that was careful and deliberate and consistent across hundreds of pages. What does it mean that no one in 600 years has been permitted to understand a single word of it? Number 2. The Cathar Extermination. On July 22, 1209, a crusading army besieging the city of Béziers in the Languedoc broke through the walls. Inside were both Cathar heretics and Catholic civilians. The papal legate commanding the spiritual authority of the campaign was Arnaud Amalric, abbot of Citeaux. According to the Cistercian chronicle of Caesarius of Heisterbach, written around 1220, he was asked how soldiers should distinguish heretics from faithful Catholics in the chaos of the assault. His reported answer has echoed through history ever since: "Kill them all, God will know his own." The Albigensian Crusade had been called by Pope Innocent III in 1208, following the assassination of his legate Pierre de Castelnau in southern France. It was not a war against a foreign enemy or a distant infidel. It was a Christian army, blessed by Rome and led by northern French nobles hungry for southern land, launched against other Christians on European soil. The Cathars were a dualist sect who believed the material world had been created not by the loving God of Scripture, but by an evil one, which meant, by extension, that the Church of Rome, represented not Christ, but his opposite. This was a theological position the Church could not survive allowing to spread. Arnaud's own letter to Pope Innocent III after the sack of Béziers, a primary source that survives in the Vatican archives, does not record the famous phrase. What it does record is a boast that nearly 20,000 of the city's inhabitants had been put to the sword, regardless of age or sex. The Inquisition was institutionalized in 1233, partly as a direct consequence of the Cathar problem. Bernard Gouy, Inquisitor of Toulouse from 1307 to 1323, documented proceedings in his Practica Inquisitionis. The last known Cathar perfectus, Guillaume Bellibaste, was burned at Villarouge Terminès in 1321. Within a century of the Crusade, the movement was functionally extinct. The Cathars believed the material world was the creation of an evil god, and in return, that world delivered the Albigensian Crusade, the Inquisition, and 7 centuries of erasure so complete that what we know of Cathar belief comes almost entirely from the documents of those who destroyed them. That completeness is not accidental, it is the point. Number 1. The Dancing Plague of 1518. In July 1518, in the city of Strasbourg in the Holy Roman Empire, a woman named Frau Trophea stepped into the street and began to dance. She danced without ceasing for 4 to 6 days. By the end of the first week, 34 others had joined her. By the end of the month, the number had reached approximately 400 people, all of them dancing compulsively without rest, without apparent will to stop. People were dancing until their feet bled, until their hearts gave out, until they collapsed and died in the streets of a major European city, while officials and physicians and priests stood watching, unable to explain what they were seeing. The city council of Strasbourg convened to address the crisis. Their physicians examined the afflicted and delivered a verdict. The dancing was caused by overheated blood, and the cure was more dancing. The council constructed a stage. They hired professional musicians. They arranged for additional dancers to join the afflicted so the episode might exhaust itself. The music, rather than calming the crowd, seems to have drawn more people in. The council then reversed course entirely, banned music throughout the city, declared the event a divine punishment, and had the survivors transported to the shrine of St. Vitus at Saverne for religious intervention. The city records of Strasbourg, held in the municipal archives, document all of this in the measured, administrative language of officials attempting to manage something they did not understand at all. Strasbourg was not the first time this had happened. Similar episodes of mass compulsive dancing had been recorded in Aachen in 1374, in Cologne in 1374, in Metz in 1418, and in Strasbourg itself in that same year of 1374. Professor John Waller of Michigan State University, whose 2008 study, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die, remains the most comprehensive scholarly account of the 1518 episode, connects these outbreaks to extreme psychological stress compounded by famine, plague, and the potent terror of Saint Vitus, whose curse was believed to manifest in precisely this way. Ergot poisoning, which causes convulsions, has been largely discounted as an explanation. Mass psychogenic illness is the current leading hypothesis, though it raises its own unanswered questions about contagion, volition, and the relationship between belief and the body. What happened in Strasbourg in 1518 is not myth or folklore. It is documented in city records, in physician notes, in chronicles, in the administrative correspondence of civic officials who were present, watching, and completely at a loss. 400 people danced until their bodies failed, in a city full of witnesses, treated by physicians, prayed over by priests, managed by a government that tried 2 opposite interventions and succeeded with neither. 400 people danced until their feet bled and their hearts gave out in a city full of witnesses, documented by officials and physicians, and not one person, then or since, has been able to say with certainty what was happening to them, why it spread, or why it stopped. Some things bury themselves. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.